Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the corporate sponsorship webinar series and our first episode today, hosted by Cosmos Sports and Entertainment. My name is Evan Colborn. I'm the Director of Business Development with Cosmos Sports, and Carrie Kaplan, our President and co-founder, is here with me as well. So thanks very much. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items that we wanted to just address. First of all, a big thank you to Central Counties Tourism and Sport Durham for hosting this webinar series and allowing us to share some of our expertise and experience, particularly in sponsorship with everybody that's on the call today. From what I understand, some people that are on watching today were at a workshop that we hosted back in October. So welcome back. And for those that are new, I think we've got a lot of good stuff that we're going to be presenting today and over the next couple weeks. So as I mentioned, this is episode 1 of 10. We're going to be running every Wednesday from 2, or every other Wednesday, I should say, from 2 to 3 o'clock between now and the end of May. So lots of good stuff, and we've decided to really focus on sponsorship over the next 10 webinars and really sequential. So starting it off at the beginning here with our topic today and moving through the sponsorship process in a very sequential way. And then we have a couple special topics that we're going to kind of bookend the series with. So special thanks to Central Counties Tours and the Sport Durham. In case if it's a little bit difficult to see what's on the slides here behind us, we are going to make all the slides available. So don't worry if you can't see anything or you can't read anything. All that's going to be made available afterwards. And our webinar today, while live, is also being recorded. So if you miss something that we say or you can't quite hear what we're saying, everything's going to be made available afterwards for people that have registered for the webinar. So don't worry about that. And lastly, we are going to be doing some Q&A to end our webinar today. If you look in the top right corner of your screen, if you're watching on YouTube, there's a live chat box. Throughout the broadcast, whenever a question comes to mind, feel free to type that question in there, and we're going to address some of those questions for the last 5-10 minutes or so. Hopefully we can get to all of them. If you can't see the live chat box, you may have to exit out of the full screen mode, and you'll see it there. So those are kind of the housekeeping items. So we'll get started. Right. So our topic today we wanted to start with is what sponsors want, and the reason for that was really, in sponsorship, that's really what it's all about. It's all about their needs and their objectives, and every sponsor is different, and every situation is different. So and it's really our job as people that are representing events or different properties to act as a bit of a consultant and understand what their needs are and how we can help provide that for them. But so Carrie, why did you think this was a really good, important topic to start, the theme of sponsorship off on?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks everybody for listening here. I know a number of you guys are at the live event that we did a while back. Apologize if my hands move around here. I have a tendency to normally to sort of walk around, so it's a little more confined space. So apologize if the seems a little confined, but I think what we found from the training, first of all, was that we talked about a number of topics, but that sponsorship in general is really where the largest area of interest is. And so, as Evan pointed out, if we could break it into key components was important. So I think, we're not saving the best for last, in the sense is that this is one of the most important, if not the most important thing that you're going to learn throughout the 10 seminars. And I think what I would say is believe it. So what sponsors want, I think the key mistake, and probably the biggest error that companies make consistently, events, teams, leagues, municipalities, is they spend a tremendous amount and disproportionate time talking about themselves. And if you're at Canadian Tire or Tim Hortons or Royal Bank, you don't want to hear about the festival or the team. You want to hear about how this matches your needs. So I sort of use the example, I think I even used it in the seminar. If you're meeting with Swiss Chalet and you didn't spend half your time talking about chicken, it was a bad meeting. If you're talking about, and I think there's just a tendency to spit out information about your event. Our event's great, and we have this many people, and we're hosting here and here. That's not what the company's looking for. The company's looking for how. If you're a hair salon, it's about people that get their hair cut, and if you're Swiss Chalet, it's about people that go to the restaurant, and if you're Meridian Credit Union, it's about people where they're going to do their banking. They look at people as potential bank people that are banking somewhere as opposed to people going to a festival. So it's I think the line there is, and we'll get more into it. It's about them. It's an extremely important topic. We could talk on this topic for 3 seminars, 3 hours, and it still wouldn't be enough. And I guess what I say to everybody listening, um, you believe it. The tendency again is to talk just far too much about yourself and make sure you're talking about them. So yeah, it's an important topic.
Great. So with that, we have a couple key takeaways for today's webinar. First and foremost is identifying, we say what sponsors want, and it really is all about them, but understanding kind of more specifically, what are some of the main objectives that sponsors are looking for when they decide to sponsor an event, and how to understand when they say a particular objective, what do they really mean? What is it that they're hoping to get out of that? And second is keeping in mind that the people that are making sponsorship buying decisions are, they're just like you and I. They're people, and they're making those decisions. So we can't remove the human component to the decision making process. So a little bit about how do we put ourselves in their shoes and understand their job and how they look at their job from their perspective. And lastly, how to effectively service sponsors. So what types of service deliverables are sponsors most commonly looking for? How can events and properties of all different sizes provide the level of service that sponsors are looking for nowadays, and really have a lasting impact with sponsors? So the first chart that we wanted to show is taken from sponsorship.com, and it's results of a 2017 study, surveyed sponsors and self-reported data, and asking, in this case, this chart asking sponsors, what are their most common objectives? And it might be a little bit hard to see on the broadcast, but the main point that we wanted to really highlight here is that, number one, that you can see right at the top is creating awareness, and visibility, and those two words really tend to be synonymous with sponsorship and marketing and advertising in a lot of ways. So it's not necessarily surprising that we see that one at the top, but Carrie, you've obviously got a lot of experience working in sponsorship in particular, and a lot of sponsorship meetings. When you're meeting with sponsors, what are the objectives that you're hearing most often? And does it align with awareness and branding and those types of things, or is it more a little bit more direct?
Yeah, here's how I would answer that. It's awareness and branding, but ultimately it's ROI. So I think what happens is awareness. So if you take that and somebody says, hey, our goal is awareness, and that's the most common thing. Somebody will say, we just want to get awareness. People don't know about Joe's coffee shop. And also Tim Hortons might say that. Tim Hortons, I think everybody knows it. Well, Tim Hortons may want to have awareness that there's 8 Tim Hortons in the community, or a new one opened. But what they're really saying is, if you ask the next question, awareness for what purpose? Why do you want awareness? And if Joe's coffee shop, he said, well, if everyone knew about Joe's coffee shop but no one came in, would you be happy? And Joe would say no, but we kind of assume that if we get a lot of awareness, people will come in. So the understanding is that awareness is a means to an end. It's important. People recognize that in order for people to come in, you have to know who it is. But so I think, again, yes, that's very consistent. The second one, if you can't read it, is increase brand loyalty. So that relates the same way, but there's a chart, it's directional. So awareness, and ultimately it leads to people making purchase decisions, and then having brand loyalties coming back. So, it's the concept of, you want to get them there and then get them back. So that's consistent. You can see there's a whole number of things there that that weigh in, but I would say that if the person says it or not, um, awareness is a means to an end.
For sure. Do you find that there's a difference between smaller businesses that are a little bit more of a local business versus some of the larger brands? You mentioned Tim Hortons. There's a difference between the local Tim Hortons owner and Tim Hortons the corporation and what their objectives are.
Right, and I think in your communities, if you're in Pickering or Ajax, it's a really good question. You're dealing with the local operators, so there's this tendency to think, oh, Canadian Tire. Well, it doesn't. You're not really worried about the person sitting in Calgary or in Vancouver and Toronto at the head office in downtown. The person that owns and operates the Canadian Tire in your community, it may be that's their life. They may own and operate one location or two, or the manager. Even if someone owns three of them, who's the manager on site? So I think the mistake is not to localize it. So I think the tendency is to think, well, we want to get Canadian Tire to sponsor us. Let's call somebody in downtown Toronto. And my comment would be, good luck. That's not going to work. Go across the road and meet with the manager of the Canadian Tire in Ajax and have that discussion. And if that person's excited and it becomes a bigger package, let them go downtown. Like, don't go downtown at all. Don't consider going downtown. Don't think about it. Don't call downtown. Don't talk unless you know the person that works in Toronto. So if you're in Pickering, there's this fear of I've got to go to Toronto, Montreal. But the good news is you don't. They don't have anything to do with you. Your decisions are localized, and that's where you want to have the discussions, even with large organizations. Start with the local person, or the only exception to that is if you personally or you guys have a relationship with somebody out of another location, but otherwise, start locally. So I guess my answer to your question is there's not as much a difference as you think. The Joe's Coffee Shop and the Tim Hortons, some of the decisions are similar.
And do you find when you're meeting with sponsors that there's about 10 or so most common objectives here? Do you find that sponsors are leaning more towards one and that really is their main objective from a sponsorship, or are they spread pretty evenly across a couple of different ones?
Yeah, I think it's spread pretty evenly. I think it more goes back to what the start of this discussion is, that the listing's important. Like they may have internal meetings, or the person you're dealing with may have sponsorship directions. They may not have done any. Some of them don't even know the term sponsorship. They'll lump advertising, marketing, sponsorship, and don't get caught up in the word sponsorship. Some companies, they're mixing in what they do on Facebook and online, and are they buying a sign in an arena, and it's all the same. And I think trying to over complicate it. No, I think it goes back to understanding what are they trying to accomplish, and then the goal is for you guys to show that you're a vehicle, that this is a really good vehicle to reach your goals. But no, I don't. I think the best answer to that, Evan, is it's all case specific. Right. By trying to say, hey, everybody's going to say awareness, you get caught because you go in a meeting and you say, hey, we have this great. So if you say, hey, we have a great awareness campaign, and you go in a meeting and the person says, oh, that's too bad. Everybody knows our brand. We're an institution in Pickering. Oh, you have an awareness campaign, we'll pass. So it's listening before speaking.
Yeah. Great. So our next, so we did want to spend a little bit of time talking specifically about awareness, because it is the most common one. But when people are saying awareness, what does that mean? What does awareness mean?
Yeah, it means I think you put a definition. Again, it may be hard. I don't know if everybody can see it exactly, but maybe do you want to maybe the definition's worth a good starting place.
Yeah, so we just pulled this off of Google, and it just says knowledge or perception of a situation or fact, or so it really, I think what it really boils down to is that awareness tends to be very synonymous with advertising and signage and things like that, and putting a logo up, and and that to assume that automatically equates to awareness maybe isn't the case. Um, if a sign is there, is that really going to generate true awareness? And when is awareness really generated? We were talking before, and had a story that where this really hit home for me. So was in Montreal for the Christmas holiday season, and despite the cold, we decided we were going to go ice skating down in Old Montreal in the Old Port, and they had an ice rink set up there, and it was sponsored by Natrel. And working in this industry, I tend to immediately notice those things, and who are the brands that are sponsoring, and what their activation is, and so that stuff immediately comes to me. But just as a bit of an experiment, as I was leaving, I was there with my girlfriend and her brother-in-law, and I asked them, who were some of the sponsors that were at the rink, and my girlfriend Tanya, could name a couple. There was Telus, and Sleeman was the beer. And her brother-in-law Joey really didn't know what I was talking about. Didn't really pick up on any sponsorship that was there. So the question really is, those signs that were there, to what extent did they generate awareness? If people don't really remember who was there.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Although there is, subliminal advertising too. If you're watching a hockey game and you're watching a play for 2 hours, and there's a Mr. Sub sign behind it, you might not consciously remember it, but I'll tell you where it comes out. So you're driving on the 401 from Oshawa to Toronto, and you see a sign and it says Mr. Sub and Dr. Sub, and you have to go. You're hungry, starving, and there's 2 signs. One's Mr. Sub with the red and white letters, and then there's one that's Dr. Sub. Most people are going to go to Mr. Sub. Most people, if they're in that situation and it's a bunch of ifs, and they're hungry enough and they want to have a sub, so why are you going to Mr. Sub? It might not be remembering. You may not have been very often. Maybe you haven't been in many years, but that awareness of a Mr. Sub logo at a hockey game and on a billboard, and you can't necessarily remember where you saw it, but you've seen it so many times that Dr. Sub might go out of business. So if I'm a franchise owner and you ask me which one I want to own, even if I feel that the Dr. Sub quality is a little better, the Mr. Sub value of that franchise is a lot higher because of the brand. And that means something. That's real. That's real that even though, and I think the mistake sometimes is to think it's all about product. So again, I know I'm sticking on this example here, but if I own that Dr. Sub, I could be really frustrated because my subs are better. Why are 3, 4, 5 times as many people? I mean, McDonald's is the classic case of that. Why are 3, 4, 5 times as many people going into the other place? And awareness is, there's other reasons, brand loyalty, quality, right? You said quality, but awareness is probably one where you don't have time to say, hey, why don't you go to one and I'll go to the other and we'll do a taste test. And so there, it has some potency on, but it has to be good experience on. But just it's sort of I guess what I was saying so even if you have a couple people and they don't notice the sign, subconsciously they may be more aware of it than you think.
Right. So that might be a great way to kind of overcome that objection. If you're meeting with the sponsor, if their objection is like I just mentioned was are people really going to remember my sign if I have it up at an event or a festival or your theater or whatever it is, and it seems like the answer is maybe not immediately, but that's going to come back over time.
Yeah, and I would argue, and one big thing on sponsorship is time. You see a billboard for 5 seconds. You see a rink board, you see it for 2 hours. So that's different. And I think that your longevity of time and repetitiveness and all that has an impact on awareness. And that's when when someone's saying, well, why would we want to be a sponsor when we can have a radio ads? Well, the radio ad's fleeting. It's 13 seconds. The Facebook, all of that stuff is very quick. What's unique about sponsorship, community activation, we have a sign up at a festival that 300,000 people are going to come to. Well, 300,000 people are going to be there for an hour, and your TD Bank sign is going to be there. So when you guys are selling that, it's different. That's important. I mean, I have a bias going into this, but I believe that the value of sponsorship in a lot of ways is significantly better than a lot of traditional advertising, or even non-traditional, even online advertising. It's just socialism. So I think that's part.
Yeah. So we were so the old kind of saying, if a tree's fallen in the forest and no one's around to hear it, we were kind of comparing that as we were coming up with the concept for this webinar. And so I guess in the example of my story, that where people don't necessarily remember, maybe it is the that the tree has fallen and people don't really notice, whereas what you're saying, over time it can have an impact. So so with awareness, again, being so closely tied with signage and branding and that kind of stuff, we've all been to events where you look at the top image there, and we see sponsors that are activated or recognized in that type of way. But you look at kind of the bottom picture, and this was just an example kind of pulled off of Google, but a really unique way to activate the Sprite brand. It's something that's certainly going to be remembered, and you see in the picture here people taking pictures of their kids in front of it. So maybe just touch on the need for unique activations as opposed to just a sign.
Yeah. So what I would say on that is there's an important point. There's 2 points I would make. Companies are more sophisticated. So you see the Sprite example. A lot of companies will initiate that and say, we want to be more integrated. We want something that's going to be memorable. But secondly, a lot of companies are not sophisticated. And the onus as an event for you guys is to sophisticate them. In other words, if someone says to you, hey, we own the local real estate agent and we'd like a sign with words on it, you guys have to say, no, absolutely not. We're not doing it. You can say it a little nicer than I just said it, but it doesn't work. They won't come back. They won't get retention. They won't deliver. So there's a Sprite, right? Sprite's part of Coca-Cola. They're the strongest brand in the history of the world. So yeah, they're pretty good. They figured it out. But a lot of people are going to look to your expertise. So don't sell signs. Don't sell ads in magazines. It's so lazy. So on your guys' part, very lazy to say, we're doing an event. Do you want to have an ad in our program, or do you want to have an announcement? That's 1985. And so what I would say is there's a sophistication, but you guys make sure it's sophisticated. Make sure all of the situations are like Sprite. They're going to pay for that. Those signage costs are extra, and companies like that are going to renew. But there's a tendency to say, but he or she only asked for a sign. Okay, so what? That's not acceptable as the event, that you take the money for something that they're not going to deliver on. If somebody's spending $1,000 of their hard-earned money, and that doesn't matter if it's Coke or the local bakery, it's still $1,000 of hard-earned money from that company. You want to provide a return by giving them something that's static and has no impact. You're not going to provide a return. So put it on yourself to give them something that has an impact.
Right. So to kind of bring this full circle to the discussion about awareness, what sponsors are really asking for when they're asking for awareness is we want a way to stand out. We want a way that is going to actually, whether it's immediate and short term, or if it's a little bit longer term, like you said, with the Mr. Sub example, we want some way that we're going to be, that we're going to stand out from the crowd and actually be noticed and recognized, and hopefully in some cases remembered. So this next chart that we wanted to touch on is taken from the 2017 Canadian Sponsorship Landscape Study, and it actually shares data from both 2016 and 2017. But in this case, what it's asked, again, it's asking sponsors and surveying sponsors, and in this case, what it's asking is what factors influence their decision. to actually sponsor a particular event over another. And taking a look at the data, the first one, consumer passions and interests, and really what how we interpret that is, does the event have a passionate audience, and do the interests of that audience align with my brand as a sponsor, and is there a good fit between our target customers and the audience that you represent? So that really makes sense. But one that really stood out to me was that the number two in 2017, and you can see it's made a fairly substantial jump up from 2016 to 2017. Number two is bias. And maybe this is just a little bit of a utopian view that I've had of the sponsorship industry, but you think all the sponsorship dollars should be kind of allocated based on the pure merit of the event and that, but that really doesn't seem to be the case when you ask the sponsors.
Yeah, so here's what I would say, guys. So if you could listen to this point, bias is actually 50%. Like, the numbers wrong. Because when you ask sponsors, what's the reason that you're sponsoring? I'm surprised actually it got to 18%, but it's probably 50 or 60 in reality. In other words, why does a sponsor work with an event? And a large part is because they feel good about working with that group or those people. So I'll give you, one small example is Golf Canada, a huge event. The Canadian Championship was called the Bell Canadian Open for many years, and then it changed to the RBC Canadian Open. The president of Bell moved to RBC. That's why. Why? Because Bell. So Bell as a company, they may have thought it was good, the merit, but the new president for Bell came in. They did not exercise their option. The person went to RBC, felt really good about the event. Now that's talking about millions and millions of dollars. And what I would say is there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of it too. There's this sort of fear that, well, that's not right, that you have a good relationship. Think of when you make I think a lot of these things is take it to your own decision. Why do you go to a specific retail store? Or why do you go to a specific restaurant? Or I know my father's gone to Home Hardware forever, his whole life. There's a Home Hardware. He doesn't like Home Depot, doesn't like Canadian Tire. He's 76 years old, and he's loyal to Home Hardware because he can tell you that he talks to Frank there. I don't know why that should be relevant, that he's going to buy a hammer at Home Hardware when Home Depot is 20 times the size, but he's loyal to that. He'll pay more for it, and I mean, I assume the prices are comparable, but he's going to go out of his way to feel comfortable with people that he feels comfortable with. And people do that with restaurants, places to eat, or again, places you shop. People are generally uncomfortable being uncomfortable. So, and again, just to clarify, the reason why that's really, when I say 50, 60%, is, again, you're asking 100 sponsors, why are you making a decision? And 18% of them actually said because of somebody I like or a bias. It's probably way higher. It's just people make, again, you have to have a comfort level and a trust level. And again, I not only say it's factual, I'd say there's nothing wrong with it. So embrace that. For your sponsors, are you having coffee with them? Are you going golfing with them? Do you give them a Christmas gift? Do you give them a gift in the summer? Are you inviting them to a barbecue? Are you doing any of that? Or are they just a number? And if people feel like they're just a number, so they spent $5,000 and that's it, it's easy for them to go somewhere else next year. But if they have a relationship and you took them for coffee twice, yeah, it matters. Yes, they're going to factor in that $5,000 is well spent. Part of the reason it's well spent because they like working with Evan Colborn. And I think if by walking, and again, this is the mistake by thinking, oh, it's all about me. They're sponsoring because my event's so great. Incorrect. That's not the reason that people are sponsoring, and it's often not the reason they're coming back. Yeah. So again, don't take that at heart. And again, my point is bias is actually number one. So I'm confident that on an unbiased survey, bias be number one.
Yeah, I guess bias is the word that could really be used is really relationship, like you said. You're in the example of your dad going to Home Hardware. It's really he feels that he has a relationship with that store or somebody at that store. Before this morning, we were recording a podcast with Joe Lowe's, and that was a really big theme. Joe Lowe's is our senior sponsorship consultant here at Cosmos, and relationship was huge for him. And he talked about, all the, that it's not so much the big, gestures necessarily about, building a relationship, but these little things over time that can build a relationship. He talked about, getting to know the people that he was meeting with, and if a sale kind of came out of it, then
Right.
that was a bit of the byproduct. But investing in those relationships, and one of the examples he gave was he picked up on a meeting that somebody, one of his contacts, really likes this mustard that's from Cleveland, and Joe remembered that, and then when he was in Cleveland, he picked up some of the mustard, and something like that you can't necessarily kind of quantify, but that can go a long way. Those small little gestures.
Well, it's a funny story. So Joe Lowe's, again, works with Cosmos. He's worked with sponsorship for 20 years, and much of that with the Ottawa Senators. And so just tell you, because you brought it up here, a story that about 2 years ago, I went to Ottawa to meet Joe, and he said, I'm having lunch with a friend. And there was a gentleman had lunch sort of, and, Joe, they talked a lot about their family, and there was like 4 of us at the table. And that's how Joe introduced him. It's a friend of mine, and we're gonna have lunch. And so we had lunch. Anyways, and then somewhere during the lunch, they started talking about that he's no longer going to sponsor the Ottawa Senators. Now, Joe's not there anymore. Well, it turns out this is an insurance company that spends 6 figures per year sponsoring the Ottawa Senators. But it was really clear that a huge part of that is the relationship with Joe Lowe's. And the guy had the guy was blunt about it. Joe, since you left, we haven't been taken care of, and we're going to walk away. Yeah. And, so he's not saying, well, the Senators lost 3 more games, or they had this many people, or the product's not as good. The discussion about renewing or not renewing was almost solely based on the relationship. And I can tell you in that example, if Joe went to work for the Ottawa Red Blacks, that insurance company would follow him. They're not going to, it's not team specific, it's person specific.
Right. Yeah, and so the other thing that I took away from this chart is the first two, the first one being consumer passion, the second being relationship and bias, and that we talked about. But after that is when you really get into the more quantitative influencers on a decision. So it's really more so that when a sponsor is looking at something, does the audience align with who I'm trying to reach? Do I have a good relationship with the person I'm dealing with? And then I can use all these other quantitative things really to justify my decision. Not so much the inverse, where looking at all the numbers and then deciding on a property.
Yeah, and it's particularly when you can. It's why also that the best sponsorship or partnerships, and I still like the word partnership. We use sponsorship because it's the common term, but I think what you're trying to talk about is a partnership, or when you meet in person. It's always harder, certain times you are forced because of geography to do some of these things remotely or over the phone, but the best relationships are actual relationships where the person feels like they're more than a client, and you're more than a event person.
Right. I think the other thing, Joe and I were talking about a fair bit about relationships is when you're working in sales and you're working, if you're trying to find sponsors for your event, you can feel a little bit of that pressure to make a sale or close a sponsorship or build that partnership. But when you're talking about relationship selling, if you go into a situation and you're trying to force a relationship, it can really have the adverse effect and hurt you in the long run. So, going into that first meeting with the intent of learning all about them and talking about them really helps to establish a bit more of a relationship.
Yeah, you say, and we use a relationship. I mean, think of if you meet somebody, and a lot of people have friends for their whole lives. Imagine if you meet somebody that you seem to hit it off with, and think that could be somebody that be a good friend, and you say to them, hey, do you want to be my friend? Let's hang out. And all of a sudden, it just got weird. Typically, that's the worst thing to do. You can say, hey, we should go for coffee. That's good. You say, can we go for coffee because I want to be your friend? And I think you'd want to be my friend. And this was a really good pre-friend discussion. Pretty weird. Yeah. So I'm saying that's what you're in the sales environment. That's what's happening. Hey, we're the Oshawa Generals hockey team and you're McDonald's, and it would be really good if McDonald's sponsored the Oshawa Generals hockey team. And that's right when McDonald's says, no, it wouldn't. Why would we want to do that? Oh, because it would be good because we're trying to get money and we want people to sponsor, and McDonald's is a big name. And it's like, okay, we're out. So that's forcing that whole contrived, you're trying to force, talk about word partnership and relationship. You can't, it's just like a personal relationship. You can't contrive it. You can take it in any situation. If a waiter comes up to you and says, "Am I doing a good job?" Again, it's weird. Like you have to let it take its natural flow of events.
Yeah. So the next thing we wanted to touch on, again, another chart taken from the Canadian Sponsorship Landscape Study, but so kind of just recapping a little bit of where we're at so far. So what sponsors want. So the first one we talked about is awareness, but understanding what awareness means, what they're really looking for, and that it's the job of us that are representing the properties to really identify what it is that the sponsor is looking for, and then articulate how is it that we can provide that to them. And then the second really being that it's more about a relationship, and that's going to carry more weight than how many people you have at your event, or a lot of the quantitative numbers that you may have about a particular event or anything like that. So, but the third one we wanted to touch on was about service and about customer service. And so again, another chart taken from the Canadian Sponsorship Landscape Study, and what it's asked is ask sponsors to rate on a scale from 1 to 5 some pretty common service elements that are part of sponsorship relationships, and asking them how important they find those, and then how often they find that they're actually provided. And what you can see here is the blue bars are the ones that are the sponsor's rating of importance, and the purple ones provided. So you can see that there's a pretty consistent gap between what's deemed important and then what's actually being provided by properties, and that's been seen every year that the study has asked that question to sponsors. So, so I guess just when you take a look at this chart, and you see that this disparity between kind of the expectation and what's being provided, how are you seeing that kind of in the sponsorship industry, and what can organizations take from this chart and apply to their events?
So you're saying the difference of the importance relative to what's provided. Good question. I think the most important thing to see is there's a gap in almost every example. So again, are you looking at what, if you're really focusing on what's important, the lines should match. Where you can see in every case there's a shortfall, and I think it's saying really try and understand what is important. And I think you can, organizations can do a much better job of that. It's saying really let's analyze what's important and let's prioritize. Sometimes, for instance, the tendency be for you to focus on things that aren't important to them. So you said, oh, we're going to give you 20 tickets to this hockey game, or we're going to give you, and it's not something that they ever asked for. Well, that's not important to them. So you're providing it, but they're not looking at it as relevant. Whereas it could be hospitality for one company, branding for another, and sampling for another. And again, the tendency is to say, well, you get sampling and tickets and branding and awareness, and 4 different companies may want 4 different things. So I think really the main thing to me is just what you can see in almost every case here. There's a matching gap. And typically that's a result of not listening well.
Right. So through those initial meetings, really trying to, just like we talked about with the awareness, is really trying to understand what is important to that sponsor, and then how can I provide it to them.
Yeah, but you may say the initial meetings, but I think it's fluid. I think it's every meeting. I think one of the things I would say too, and I know we talked about this when we did the training in person, is if somebody does a sponsorship and they sign a deal and they're not happy, and they spend $5,000. I don't want to the last thing I want to do is refund the $5,000. But what happens when, if you go to a store and you buy something and you're not happy, the first thing the store tries to do is exchange it. A restaurant tries to exchange it. you have a meal that you didn't like, let me bring you something else. They don't want to refund it right away. You just got your meal. It's like, oh, you know what? I don't like the taste of this pasta. It's like, okay, what would you like? They still, the goal, they still want to charge you. The goal is still to get you to spend $20 on a meal that you enjoy, as opposed to if you just refund it. Because the downside, if you just refund it, they didn't have a good experience. Maybe it's okay they got their money back, but they just didn't enjoy their meal. They may not come back. But if you think about the power of a quick switch, so you got pasta, how is it? It's okay. Well, why don't I get you something, Brandon? What would you like? Well, I know you were deciding between pasta and a club sandwich. Why don't I bring you the club sandwich? The power of that. I think, a restaurant could say, well, we're going to lose, we have to throw the pasta in the garbage. By not doing that exchange, they're never coming back. There's the risk that they never come back. Had a pasta, didn't like it. Now I'm leaving. So, one of the things I think a lot of restaurants do is they ask that question, how is everything? But there's two problems with that. One, people are very reluctant to give a true answer. So, you may say to the person across the table, oh, this pasta is not very good, but you're reluctant to give a true answer. And two, a lot of restaurants don't ask it sincerely. The sincere way to ask that question is, how's the meal? Because if you don't love it, we'll exchange it. Who says that? Nobody. You don't love it, not like it. If you don't love it, I'd rather get it. Do you love it? Is it great? Is it the best club sandwich you ever had? Wow. Is it really good? You really enjoy it? Yeah. Because if you don't really enjoy it, I'd rather get you a hamburger. Now that's good customer service. And if your restaurant's good, 90% of it, no, I really like it. It's great. I'm enjoying it. It's good. I don't want to change it out. But I think that it's fluid. It doesn't end when you sign a contract, that relationship is, here's your deal. Are you happy with it? You don't want people to feel like they made the mistake.
Right. Yeah, I think the other takeaway that I take from this, because there's going to be some organizations that are on the webinar today that maybe smaller organizations, could be a nonprofit that they're putting on an event or representing a cause, or there's organizations of all different sizes. So you may look at this list of service deliverables and say, we just don't have the resources to provide all of that.
Yep.
And maybe that's part of we're not an MLSC, we can't provide all of that. So one of the things that I take away from that is, there are some things where there's a much bigger discrepancy. So you can see, a target profile in terms of rated importance and how often it's provided, there's a big gap. So by providing maybe some of the things that are rated very important but very seldom provided, all of a sudden, you start to stand out in that sponsor's mind as doing
Right.
something that no one else is doing.
Right. Well, and one thing I'm going to say here, and you'll probably hear me say it I'll say it more than once on different sessions that we do. There's a common misconception. I talk to everybody who's listening to this. And the common thing is we do these presentations and people will come away saying two things. Sounds good. I don't have, and when I say this, people are going to nod their heads. Sounds good, but I just don't have the money. Or, and they kind of go together. Sounds good, but I just don't have the time. I do this all myself. We don't even have time to do sponsorship. I'm doing operations. So what I would say is this is designed for the smallest of organizations. If you're one employee, if you're sitting on this call and you're the only employee in your organization, it's still doable. It can be $5,000 or $500 or $50 or in-kind services or whatever it is. It's not limiting. And I think it's a mistake to think, well, this all sounds good for bigger organizations. This concept is identical regardless of how small you are. So there's businesses within your community that probably want to be engaged with you in some capacity. And some of these may be free. It may not even be, maybe that they're not spending money, but they're engaged somehow. But most of you guys here believe in what you're doing. You believe in the association you work with or the event you work with. And if you believe in it, the question is, do you believe in it enough that it's good for a company to partner with you? And if you can get yourself to that belief, then, you can have those discussions. So again, I'm just kind of want to have that parameter that it's very easy for people to look at this and say, I hear it all the time. It's the most common objection I hear in any of these type of seminars. Sounds good. I'm too small for this. I don't have the time or money. I don't buy it. I think you all have the time and money because it's just start small. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to say, look, sponsorship is something, growing from 0 to 1 is a lot of growth. So it can be from 10 to 20 or 0 to 1 or 1,000 to 2,000, whatever. But I just think if you're listening to this seminar, sponsorship is important. And again, or I think it would be, and don't downplay your ability to have those discussions.
Yeah, I think in particular for the smaller organizations, really think of it in that 80-20 principle. So what's the 20% of these things that are going to have 80% of the results or the impact? With limited resources, I'll focus on that 20% as opposed to trying to spread myself too thin.
Well, and there's the point of, again, I use the Oshawa Generals. If you're a sponsor of the Oshawa Generals, you might be one of 50. If you're a sponsor of a small festival that you're doing and you're one of one, A, that company can get a lot of value. B, there's a brand loyalty that people will appreciate. People in your community or on your street or as part of the event will appreciate that company or those companies invested. So you can make that case to the company. You can make the company case to TELUS or the local Ford dealership, or that, hey, like you could be for $5,000, you can be our title sponsor and you can have signage everywhere and you can do test drive cars and you could, whatever you could do. So again, don't, having confidence in the value of your event to partners is important.
I think the topic of service and the desire for all these service deliverables from sponsors, just it does speak to that need to want to be reassured about their decision, that there's somebody that's just like you or I that are sitting in the sponsorship decision seat, and they have a boss that they have to report to about where they're allocating the funds, and they want to be reassured that I made a smart decision, I made a wise decision, and here's how I can back that up. And also want to feel that this isn't the only thing I have in my job, so I feel like I'm being taken care of and don't have to worry about it. So yeah. Great. So one of the kind of the final points that we wanted to touch on before we get into some Q&A here is the need to get your sponsors involved. So sponsorship, and a lot of the people that are on the call, they represent events that are all different, whether it's sports, performing arts, or festivals, or community events, or causes, or whatever it is. But it's not the same as buying radio ads or buying billboards or TV advertising, things like that. There's a lot of cool things that happen with these events and these properties, and getting sponsors involved in that and showing them the behind the scenes or the access and that kind of stuff can go a long way to building that bias a little bit in your favor and building that relationship. You've seen that with I know with the Beast, we have some sponsors that we try to get involved in different ways, not just your traditional ways, but get involved in the hockey operations or get involved in things like that.
Yeah, I think providing unique access to sponsors, they're just people. So if a sponsor is the director of marketing of a company and you can have them meet an athlete or meet a performer. So you might say, well, it's not that big. We have a local band that's performing. Okay, well, the person that's the marketing manager of RBC Pickering, it might be really cool for them to get backstage to meet the local band. You might think nothing of it. That's pretty unique for that person. Or one that's common that is a lot of events. There's cooking cook-offs, or there's groups. You say the 4 people made jam, and we're going to do a contest for the best jam at the X festival. Well, you have 3 judges. Why are the 3 judges not 3 of your corporate sponsors? Like that kind of stuff. That's different. It's interactive. It's fun. It's also not stress related. Now, if you ask one of your corporate partners to sing on the stage, you get a pretty narrow group that 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20 might say that's cool, and the other 19 are going to be scared and not want to do it. So part of it is not putting people in situations that they're going to be comfortable. But can you be a judge for? Again, they're not the one making the jam; they're the one judging it. I think so. If you can create some environments where the sponsors. If you think of the sponsor as a person, you know, it's Mary. It's not McDonald's. It's not TD Bank. It's Mary Jones who's sitting here, and she may have a family, and she, has a life, and she happens to work for TD. Well, so what's wrong with doing a couple of fun interactive things? And the reason, again, back to the previous point, is then it becomes memorable. And it's an important, I'll give you sort of one quick example that we're doing with the Brampton Beast, and I've seen it done with a number of teams. So you have a school day event, company will sponsor kids coming to a hockey game. Great, company spends money, the company goes to meet the kids, and 500 kids come to a hockey game courtesy of RBC. That's not what's as powerful. What's powerful is every one of those 500 kids writes a thank you to RBC. Dear RBC, I got to go to my first hockey game. And some of them are pictures and some of them are letters. And that's what's going to be up on the wall at RBC. And what's underrated is that's the number one reason for renewal. Not I got my money's worth, not, there's other reasons too. But the number one reason, talking about bias, the number one reason is because I got 26 letters sent to my office of kids that went to that hockey game. So I'm in. Yeah. So I think you can see someone cynically, you could say, well, that's crazy. Well, is that like, that's not a very good banking decision for RBC. Yeah, maybe not. But there's a feeling of the team did a good job. And that's the kind of thing you can do at any event. Is there a proper thank you? Is there a proper acknowledgement to, and again, the example there, it's from the kids. So it's not from the school. It's not the same for the school to say thank you, RBC. That doesn't have the same touch as a 9-year-old saying thank you. So it's really thinking these things through on what is actually going to have an impact. But, I mean, all that stuff works.
Yeah. So that kind of brings us to a wrap on the presentation. So just to kind of to wrap up, some of the themes that we talked about. First was understanding when you're meeting with sponsors, understanding what the true objective of their sponsorship is. So if they say awareness, digging a little bit deeper, that awareness doesn't necessarily equate to branding or just signage or things like that. It's understanding really what are they hoping to get out of this sponsorship, and how what are their goals? Are they short term, long term, and all sorts of things. So they're the sponsor, what in terms of what sponsors want, they're looking for somebody that really understands their business and understands their objectives and how they're going to help them achieve them. And then the second being relationship, and people want to deal with people that they like and want to buy from people they like. So focusing on a relationship as opposed to thinking only just trying to make the sale at the beginning and talking all about your event or talking all about yourself. Focusing on that relationship is going to go a lot further, and ultimately is one of the biggest influencers on decision making for sponsorship people. So relationship, getting involved, showing them that this is cooler than buying billboards. This is cooler than buying radio ads. It's not the same. There's a lot more benefit to sponsoring an event or a team or something like that than there is to if you just want eyeballs, then there's other ways to do that. But this is a little bit more than that. So with that, we're going to turn it over to some Q&A. So throughout the presentation, if you had any questions or anything, if you've submitted them, then great. So Rebecca, any questions? No. Okay. So in that case, we'll leave it at that for today. So again, want to thank Sport Durham and Central Counties Tourism for hosting us today and allowing us to host this webinar. Our next episode is 2 weeks today, and that's where we're really going to start getting into identifying opportunities, what specific opportunities sponsors are interested in and what they're looking for. And I think one of the more popular questions about sponsorship in particular is what's it worth, and how do I understand what my sponsorship inventory is worth, and then how am I making sure that I'm not charging too much, charging too little, and so forth. So So that's on our next episode, which will be 2 weeks today. So again, want to thank everybody for taking the time out and tuning into the webinar. Again, this has been recorded, so everyone that's registered for the webinar will have access to the recording in case you missed anything, and we'll also make sure that the slides are made available for everybody in case it was a little bit hard to see on the screen here. So with that, thank you very much, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.